This Yusuf, I think it's very fitting that there's an icon in the background. Actually, three of them, but you can't see them. I'd like to say peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria. And thank you for your prayers lately. Please keep them coming. My family needs them in this darkest time. I've seen a lot of things. I haven't really been on YouTube, but just the minor discussions I've seen have startled me, because I am a thing that I love most is history. In the profane world, there's people who don't between profane and sacred. In the profane world, I love history, and I've been a student of history, and I still am. And the period that I love most is from 800 BC to AD 800. I often hear 800 AD, which kind of frazzles me a little bit whenever that's with language. I think with common language now, it gets acceptable to say AD 800 or 800 AD, but not one of the fans of CE and BCE, because I just think it's kind of a silly half attempt. But what really irritates me when people say year zero. Well, the only year zero was in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. There was a time before zero, which is when they started the dating from. So there's 1 BC and AD 1, and that's how the counting system is. And I often get asked, when does BC start? At what point does it start? And I say it's like a line. It goes either directions infinitely. And it's not like AD is going to stop. Well, unless we have something like the Apocalypse of John or something like that. But so there's many silly questions or silly assumptions. One of them is that Christians used Levitical law. Now, I challenge anybody in church in the history of the church of the first 1,000 years. Just as I won't judge, a very modern Muslim as an example of Islam. Let's do the first 1,000 years of either religion. The first 1,000 years, you had 300 years of persecution of Christians believing violence was extremely evil, and that there could be no Christian establishment in this earth except for the establishment of the church, which acted as a government. Now, it didn't govern any land, but it governed a body of people. It was even when the Christians became emperors, which about, I can say the Roman state became Christian 137 or 371 AD. AD 371. I'll make that mistake throughout the video. Constantine did not affect Christianity in any way. He didn't really care. He just wanted to know what this religion was. And the establishment of the New Testament canon, the oldest thing, well, we can find the Muratorian canon of what books are reliable, which the church knew were reliable, what was debated, and what were obviously spurious. And that comes from about the 2nd century, I believe 150 to 170 area. And we have verses that are in the canonical scriptures. The first, the four gospel accounts that are in the New Testament. Christ always saying, my kingdom is not of this earth. Turn the other cheek. People can find quotes like, I have not come to bring peace but a sword, and that verse is metaphorical, and it's always been known to be metaphorical. nobody ever took it as that being the case, because if you look at the bulk of it, of the Christian writing in the New Testament, or you look at the bulk of the New Testament, violence is can't do it, and even many cases, even in self-defense. Now, I believe the commission given for turn the other cheek was for the apostles, was for the disciples, and were for the Christians. The Christians, even of the New Testament, recognized civil law. Christ talked with Roman soldiers, so did the apostles. So they differentiated between how you act and the law that needed to be carried out, a ruling system on this earth. But righteousness and the law were two different things. This runs throughout the whole New Testament. The Old Testament obviously was tacked on as a means for history, show the coming of the Messiah, show that God created the world ex nihilo, except it's not explicitly in there, but it is explicitly in the New Testament, to the foreshadowing, and to look back as a teaching tool for Christians, as a reflection for ourselves to look back on and meditate. And all the violent passages that are in the Old Testament were considered history. They were considered just to be for that time, and even the Jews will tell you that this warfare was just for this time, even if there's some brutal warfare that was commanded by God. And Christianity had suffered under persecution for about 300 years, and then even after that you had emperors who were Monophysites, who were all these strange heresies. They were Arians or Nestorians, so it was constant conflict with the Byzantine emperors. After that you had the rise of Islam, and then after that you had the rise of communism, so it was almost under constant persecution, which there was an early saying, the blood of the martyrs is the seeds of the church, and a martyr wasn't somebody who fought on a battlefield, it was somebody who confessed Christ and was killed for Christ. So trying to quote the Old Testament to justify yourself doesn't work. It's already seen as that period is over with. Sometimes people call it the Old Covenant, New Covenant. We're under the New Covenant, not the Old Covenant. Never was there ever any accounts of Christians slaughtering sheep, or saying, oh, that's mixed with that cloth is mixed with linen and leather, you can't wear it, or you can't eat pork, or I mean, the New Testament goes through this whole thing of there is no difference between Jews and Gentiles. And even equality of women can be found in there. I think there's one verse in one of Paul's epistles where he gives an opinion saying women shouldn't talk and shouldn't speak in church. Which is, I think, obvious, since there was no women presbyters back then. There was deaconesses, but you wouldn't have women bickering in church, and I think that goes for everybody, and that's pretty much how it was understood until much later in the West. But the very, very late West, I will not include in this because that's way too late. That's after 1,000 years. Now we look at Islam. If you look at the basically Old Testament of the Koran, which is not the old, the Koran was given over a very short period of time. We find when Muhammad didn't have power, he was basically a guy going around preaching Unitarianism, kind of, just saying there's one God. And the verses, are pretty brutal, but they're not as brutal. And then we have the Median surahs, which outweigh, they abrogate, they totally annihilate. If a verse is given, and this is known in Islam, it's not known against with the complete apologists who are ignorant of Islam, and I've done multiple videos about this. If Allah says, be peaceful to the mushrikeen, the pagans, the Nasrani, the Christians, the Yahudi, let them be. They have their religion, you have yours. That's an earlier verse. The later verses where it says, do not tolerate them, slaughter them, find them, kill them wherever they're at, they overpower that verse. Many people would say that's hypocrisy. Muslims say, oh, well, that's giving a more perfect revelation. So if we look at the Median verses, they're much more brutal, and it's a command to go out and conquer the entire earth, and it's irrevocable, and it's for all time and forever. And the final surah, which is considered the final surah by Sunni and Shia alike, every surah in the Quran begins Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which means in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Surah 9 does not begin that way. And Muslim scholars have even theorized that that's because Allah is no longer merciful or beneficent. And it commands the global conquest of the world, and Muhammad set up a ruling system, a set of laws, Sharia, and a ruling system under the Caliphate. To say, oh, Christianity and Islam can both be violent equally, and well, anybody can be violent, but the mandate for violence is not there in the New Testament. It actually is abhorred. The Christ of the New Testament and the apostles were absolutely against any physical violence. They forgave people. Christ on the cross even forgave, said, I forgive you, you know not what you do. And he was readily to forgive. The story of Jesus coming across a woman who was caught in adultery and about to be stoned, and the crowd was around her, and what did he do? The first thing he did, he started writing in the sand. He distracted everybody's attention from the woman who was, in a state of horrible shame. He started writing on the ground and distracted people. And then he stood up and he said, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. And slowly, one by one, they left, and he said, who is here to condemn you? She said, no one. He said, then I condemn you, then I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. With Muhammad, a woman came to him and said, confessed to him and said, I've committed adultery. He said, go and see if you were with child. She came back, she says, I'm with child. He said, go until the child's born. She came back, the child was born. He said, go away until the child's weaned. She came back, she said, the child's weaned. He said, okay, the child's weaned, killed her, had her executed. This is considered a great act of mercy by Muhammad because he spared the child. The command for global conquest is in Islam, and it's conquest by the sword. If you look at the first 100 years after the death of Muhammad, and not even after the death, after he took Medina, year 1 in the Muslim calendar, we see expansion by bloody warfare going across North Africa and up into France and all the way into India. Muhammad in his lifetime took part in raids where Christ never lifted a sword, never wanted anybody to die. So this idea that they both can inspire violence, well, reading the New Testament and reading the Meccan surah or the Median surahs, no, sorry. I shouldn't even say sorry. It's not the same. This new form of Protestantism that thinks, oh, the Old Testament is just as valid as, how can it be just as valid when Christ basically fulfills everything in the Old Testament, so it's not to be done anymore, and Paul reinforces all of this. And Paul's writings are, are the bulk of the New Testament, and I urge people to read that. I urge people to read the New Testament and then to read the Meccan or the Median surahs. So, no, 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 no. Now, when I was a Muslim, I looked at the Christians and I felt bad for them. I said, you know, somebody attacks them or their family, they can't even defend themselves. What the hell is that? And I viewed the Muslims as the good guys. You know, there's prostitutes out there, there's a pimp, there's gang members. Go out and kick the shit out of them. You know, bring justice to the world now. Problem is, it's 7th century Arab justice. And I didn't believe in democracy. I thought democracy was evil because man does not have rights. It just has the privileges that God gives him, and the only rights that he has are what Allah has said to have given man. So when people say, oh, Islam and Christianity, they both inspire war, I would say no. Was there justification for war by Christians? Yes. By Buddhists? Yes. By Muslims? Yes. Sam Harris talks about this. I mean, if you're really fundamentalist Protestant, you become Amish. You don't fight, you don't take part in government. I mean, to say that the Amish, the Jains, the Muslims, and the Mormons are all on the same level and can all inspire violence, no, not legitimately. I would say the Mormons can turn violent very quickly, and they began as a violent group. But no, the words of Christ and the words of Muhammad are very different. Night and day. This is something that brought me out of Islam, of comparing Muhammad to Christ, because there was still some value in the New Testament. Whatever agrees with the Koran is valid in the New Testament, so I would read. No, you're not allowed to hate your enemy. You have to love your enemy. In Islam, that's not how it goes. Many atheists may be slapping their heads saying, of course you would hate your enemy, you know. You should. But no, this is something that I find extremely silly, and I think it needs to be combated. This has been Yusuf Al-Tahir. Peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria. And I would challenge people to take a look at read the New Testament and read the Meccan surahs, because the Christian lives by the New Testament, or not the Meccan surahs, the Median surahs. The Christian lives by the New Testament, does not live by Levitical law, never has in all of history. Maybe the Ebionites, but they had died out by the time of Nicaea. And to take a look at the Median surahs, especially Surah 9. Take it easy. Thank you for all your prayers, and keep praying. We're going to need them, especially for Thursday and Friday. Those are going to be the hard days. Peace to you, and may God save Serbia and Syria. BCE, because I just think it's kind of a silly half attempt. But what really irritates me when people say year zero. Well, the only year zero was in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. There was a time before zero, which is when they started the dating from. So there's 1 BC and AD 1, and that's how the counting system is. And I often get asked, this is Yusuf. I think it's very fitting that there's an icon in the background. Actually, 3 of them, but you can't see them. I just say peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria. And thank you for your prayers lately. Please keep them coming. My family needs them in this darkest time. I've seen a lot of things. I haven't really been get asked, when does BC start? At what point does it start? I say it's like a line, you know, it goes either directions infinitely. And it's not like AD is going to stop, you know. Well, unless unless we have something like the Apocalypse of John or something like that. But so there's and I still am in the period that I love most is from 800 BC to AD 800. I often hear 800 AD, which kind of frazzles me a little bit whenever that's with language. I think with common language now it gets acceptable to say AD 800 or 800 AD, but not one of the fans of CE and B on YouTube, but just the minor discussions I've seen have startled me because I am a thing that I love most is history. In the profane world, there's people who don't. There's between profane and sacred. In the profane world, I love history, and I've been a student of history.